We took the last week off for a little family vacation, and we went to a lake about 3 to 4 hours north of us in Wisconsin. It was a really lovely time and a good change of pace for our family. I'll share a little snapshot of our trip at the end of this video, but we came home to a pretty empty fridge. So I have a whole chicken cooking in the oven that we'll have for dinner, and I pulled out a roast for tomorrow. So now this afternoon, I'm going to make some of our favorite nourishing homemade snacks to have on hand to use as either snacks or easy meal additions because we have a full week ahead. When we first moved onto our homestead, leaving for trips felt really stressful. But I've relaxed quite a bit over the last few years, and it doesn't stress me out quite so much anymore, even when it's during the middle of summer and gardening season. We have great neighbors that take care of our animals, and for the most part, 1 week off from the garden is totally fine. The main loss that we found when we came home was that about a third of our carrots got eaten and chewed down, probably by bunnies, but this could have easily happened with us being here too. Everything else is looking great and really took off while we were away. The corn in our Three Sisters garden is tasseling and the ears are forming. The beans are nicely trellising up the corn and starting to produce beans. Squash are sprawling out into the walkways between the rows, and so many butternut squash are forming. Potatoes and sweet potatoes have mostly flowered. It's just so exciting to go out and see all of these things growing so well. In our kitchen garden, the greens are abundant, and some of the beets and onions are ready to be harvested anytime. Our first few tomatoes are starting to ripen, and 2 of our dwarf Cortland apple trees are ripe with fruit that's ready to be picked. If it's ready. Get it? Oh, popped right off. So it's probably ready to go.
This one.
The 2 big things that are my top priority right away when getting back are harvesting our broccolini and our basil. So one of our broccolini plants is definitely past its prime since we've been gone for harvesting, and the florets have already started to flower a bit, so we'll give those to the cows, but the rest are looking really good. So we're gonna harvest those for making a cheesy chicken broccoli rice casserole this week. The basil is looking big and beautiful, so I'm gonna harvest a ton of that to make huge batches of pesto to freeze as much pesto as I can. And it's good to see that the lettuce seed that we planted a couple weeks ago is popping up nicely and should be ready to harvest in another week or 2. The first thing I'm going to make are homemade fudgsicles. So fudgsicles were a favorite of mine in the summer when I was a kid, but the ingredients in store-bought fudgsicles are horrible. Basically, they're non-fat milk with several different kinds of sugar and a whole list of other sketchy ingredients. When it comes to any meal or snack, I always try to make sure to have a blend of protein and or fat along with carbohydrates. Most snacky foods are purely carbohydrates and sugars, which will spike your blood sugar and make you feel hungry and yucky soon after. But by adding protein and fat with those carbohydrates, it's going to offer significantly more nutrition, but also fill you up way more. The secret ingredient in these fudgsicles is a couple of avocados, and this really gives them a smooth, creamy texture. So you're gonna throw your avocados in the blender along with some milk, maple syrup. We use carob powder that we get from Azure Standard. We love to use carob powder as a substitute for cocoa powder for more nutrients, but either one would work fine in this recipe. And then I throw in a pinch of salt. You're gonna blend that all up in your blender and pour it into popsicle molds and freeze them. We have these basic silicone popsicle molds that I can link below, along with the complete recipe. And the trick that we've found to taking the popsicles out of the mold is to run them under warm water for about 10 to 15 seconds right after removing them from the freezer, and then kind of push the bottom and work the popsicle out of the mold. They usually release pretty easily after running them under the water. And these are such a nice treat to have on hand after working outside or going to the pool in the summertime. Gelatin gummies are probably the most common snack that we make. You only need 3 ingredients, and these are perfect for taking with on a hike or a half day out because they're small and really portable. To make these, all you need is fruit juice, gelatin, and if you're using an unsweetened juice, you may want to add a little bit of honey or other sweetener. I'm going to be making grape gummies today because I need to finish up the grape juice that we canned from last year as we wait for our grapes to finish ripening this year to harvest. We have tons of grapevines around our property, and we usually harvest the grapes in either September or October. They're really the best harvested after it's frosted because it really causes them to naturally sweeten, and they're really, really delicious after the first frost. And it's looking like it's going to be a really good year for our grapes. My tip for opening sealed canning jars is to use the band of the canning jar and insert it between the lid and the thread of the jar and kind of use it to pry open the lid. It can take a little figuring out to get the exact placement down, but once you do, it's a really easy way to unseal the lids. To make these, I pour about 1/4 to 1/2 cup of juice into a bowl and sprinkle about 3 tablespoons of gelatin over the room temperature liquid. This is called blooming the gelatin, and what this does is it activates the gelatin to help it dissolve more easily without clumping. So I'm going to let this just sit there with the gelatin over the room temperature liquid, and while that's blooming, I'm going to heat up the rest of my juice along with a little bit of honey because this grape juice is unsweetened and it's fairly tart on its own. So you want to heat your juice just until it's warm but not boiling. After the juice is warmed up, pour it into your mixture with your bloomed gelatin and mix everything together thoroughly until the gelatin is completely dissolved. I still had a few little gelatin clumps here, I think because some of it got piled up on the grape juice and didn't quite bloom properly, but it's really not much at all. You want to work fairly quickly here because once that liquid starts to cool, they're going to gel pretty quickly. So you're going to pour them into silicone molds. I like to use these mini muffin molds. I think they're just the right size. But if you don't have molds, you can also pour them into an 8x8 baking dish or something similar. And then once you poured out the liquid, you're going to refrigerate the gummies for a couple of hours until they're easily removable from the molds. Or if you poured them into a pan, this is where you would slice them into small squares. You'll want to store these gummies in the refrigerator, and I like to make sure we use them within a week or so. Muffins or quick breads are another great option to have as ready-to-go, easy snacks, additions to meals, or even just to have as a sweet treat. So I always prefer recipes that are more rich in fat and protein than your standard muffin or quick bread recipe.
It just popped off.
And if it pops off really easily, that's good.
I didn't
Ooh,
even...
that one did.
Yeah, when I was looking at the bottom to see if it was good, it just like...
Popped right off. Well,
yeah.
that's probably means it's right. Because we just harvested apples, I'm going to make this favorite recipe of ours. It's a gluten-free apple bread. It's a great way to use up those apples with some bruises or bad spots that you don't want to use for fresh eating apples. I also love this recipe because it uses 4 eggs, which is a lot more than your typical recipe, and just a small amount of maple syrup for the sweetener. I use a mixture of coconut flour and tapioca flour, which gives it a great texture that's really moist. This is one of my favorite recipes to bring to gatherings or dinners because it's always a big hit. I mix the wet ingredients and then add your dry ingredients and pour that into a prepared loaf pan. And then I'm just gonna sprinkle a little bit of brown sugar and cinnamon on top. Bake that in a 350-degree Fahrenheit oven for about 40 to 45 minutes until your bread is fully set. And so while this is baking, I'm gonna go ahead and make some egg-based tortillas. This is one of my favorite recipes because these are so versatile to be used as tortillas, wraps, or crepes. But because they're egg-based, they're gonna be way higher in protein, healthy fats, and nutrients than your standard tortilla or wrap. And they also hold together so well. And because we have a ton of chickens on our homestead, they're a great way to use up those extra eggs. We're gonna use these for tacos tomorrow, but then we'll have quite a few left over to use later in the week. I love having these on hand if I need something quick, and especially if we're on the go. So sometimes I'll spread some peanut butter and jelly on them and kind of make a little peanut butter and jelly roll up, or I'll make a wrap with maybe some chicken or turkey, shredded cheese, lettuce, and tomato. To make them, crack 8 eggs into a bowl and then add a little bit of water and coconut oil or butter. Stir together your wet ingredients and then you're gonna add your dry ingredients. So that's 1 cup of either tapioca flour or arrowroot flour, plus 1 tablespoon of coconut flour, and sprinkle in a little salt. Use a whisk to mix that concoction together to break up any clumps of flour that can form. So mix all that together until it's nice and smooth. I like to cook these in a small cast iron pan. So I'm gonna heat the pan on low until it's nice and hot. You don't need to worry about adding any oil to the pan. As long as your pan is seasoned, you can just add your batter straight to the dry pan. Once it's hot, scoop your batter into the pan. Then I'd like to pick up the pan and swirl it around to make sure a thin layer of the batter is fully coating the whole base of the pan. A 1/4 cup measuring cup works great for this. And if there are any little holes in the bottom, I just fill them in with just a little bit of batter. After a minute or two, flip the tortillas over. They should flip really easily, and then you're gonna cook them on the other side for another minute or two and remove. And then do this over and over again until you use all the batter. This recipe makes somewhere in the vicinity of 12 to 15 tortillas depending on the size of the pan that you use. It's always a little challenging to get back into the swing of things after being away, but it feels good to be heading into the week with a little bit of a game plan for meals and having some things prepped and ready to go. I promised at the beginning of the video we'd share a little glimpse into our week away. So it was a full week of fishing, paddle boarding, biking, horseback riding, swimming, trips to the local ice cream shop, and a couple of our kids got to try water skiing for the first time.
All right, Abe!
No horse, no. We got him before he ate it. See that? That's the window.
I'm so grateful for the time away and the memories made, but it's also really good to be home. This little home and this homestead is always my favorite place to be. Good stuff.